In 2016, I declared, I am your voice. Today I add, I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. I am your retribution. Not going to let this happen. Not going to let it happen.
This is not revenge, right? What this is about accountability. I don't want to see anyone, including Donald Trump, indicted, prosecuted, convicted, incarcerated, simply because I fundamentally disagree with them. This is all about accountability. He needs to be held accountable for his dirty deeds.
Prosecutors in New York move closer to a possible indictment of Donald Trump as he refuses to testify this week before a grand jury. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. Donald Trump could become the first former president in U.S. history to be indicted following the decision by the Manhattan District Attorney to invite Trump to testify this week over an alleged hush money payment and falsification of payment records in the lead-up to the 2016 election. The inquiry started almost 5 years ago after Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, was sentenced to 3 years in prison for organizing hush money payments of $130,000 to Stormy Daniels, with whom then presidential candidate Trump allegedly had an extramarital relationship. Cohen, who is the key witness of the case, claims Trump knew about the falsely labeled payments, which form the basis of possible criminal charges. Trump, who is running for president for a third time, called it a political witch hunt, saying the aim is to, quote, take down the leading candidate by far in the Republican Party.
This is the most dangerous time in the history of our country, and Joe Biden is leading us into oblivion. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers. They are people that don't get it, although in some cases they get it. They get it for their wallets. But we can't do that. We can't let that happen.
Trump already faces several other criminal and civil investigations, including allegations of election interference in the state of Georgia, as well as a special counsel inquiry into Trump's alleged efforts to prevent the peaceful transfer of power in 2020. And a probe by the Justice Department for the illegal possession of top-secret documents and alleged obstruction of federal efforts to retrieve them. The House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, meanwhile, identified Trump as, quote, the center of the first and only effort by any U.S. president to overturn an election and obstruct the peaceful transition of power. In December 2022, the committee voted unanimously to refer Trump to the Department of Justice for prosecution, recommending charges including obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and attempts to, quote, incite and assist or, quote, aid and comfort an insurrection. But could the Stormy Daniels case result in the first indictment of Trump? Joining me now to discuss this is Gene Rossi, former Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. He represented the former attorney of Stormy Daniels and worked with the Southern District of New York prosecutors. Gene Rossi, you have 3 decades of criminal and civil litigation experience at the U.S. Department of Justice. As a former prosecutor, how serious is the likelihood that Trump will face criminal charges? Will we see an indictment in this case?
Based on my experience and my involvement in this matter several years ago, because I represented a key figure in this transaction, I think there's a very good chance that President Trump will be indicted by the Manhattan DA. And the reason I say that is they're at the end of their investigation. They apparently have issued a target letter to President Trump to invite him to testify before the grand jury. And the rule of thumb for a prosecutor is you usually send that target letter to an individual at the end of your investigation. So I think they're at the point now where it's highly likely that a criminal charge or charges will be presented to the grand jury against President Trump.
The fact that he's refused to testify, should we read anything into this?
No, absolutely none. An individual is presumed innocent. And just because someone does not testify in front of a grand jury, it has no evidentiary value. And as a matter of fact, it's extremely rare for a target to testify in front of a grand jury. So he received extremely wise legal advice, and there should be no inferences to be drawn by his declining the invitation to testify in the grand jury.
How will the American public ultimately look at this if Trump is indeed indicted?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that the federal officials, the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, where I was intimately involved with my client, the statute of limitations on any federal election laws federally has run. And that statute ran probably around August of 2022. If I'm an average citizen, I'm going to say, listen, these allegations, if they occurred, were in 2016. Why are you presenting charges in 2023? So that's the first thing. Number two, it's a state prosecutor, and it appears the state prosecutor is using an apparent violation of a federal law to bootstrap a state felony. So those are the two things that strike me the most early on this. Now, will it prevent the Manhattan DA, Mr. Bragg, from presenting charges to the grand jury? I would bet that he would still go forward.
But when you look at this case in the grand scheme of things, will Americans take it seriously when essentially what you have is a former president potentially being prosecuted for stealing a slice of pizza rather than a bank robbery?
You brought up a very good point, because the amount in controversy is $130,000. And in Trump world, this is probably a tip for a cup of coffee. And you know, putting aside how old this case is, it's not a large amount of money. And the federal election laws are so complicated and convoluted. President Trump does have an argument that it's a lot of smoke, no fire. And plus, this case is stale, it's old, and they're making a mountain out of a molehill. That would be their defense if he is indicted. And then the state prosecutor is obviously going to argue that this is very serious, that business records were falsified to conceal a federal crime involving election laws. So it'll be a battle of narratives, and but at the end of the day, it's not you know, a bomb of an allegation. It's sort of a firecracker, if you will.
But ultimately, though, how easy will it be for prosecutors to indict a former president, something that's never happened before? There will be suspicions, even accusations, that there is some kind of political interference here, the closer it gets to the next election.
Well, that's the narrative that President Trump's going to push forward, is that you have a Democratic DA, Mr. Bragg, and he's putting together this web of deception using a federal law to raise a state misdemeanor to a felony. And he does have an argument that this may be a political witch hunt. I think what we should keep in mind is there are some very serious investigations going on by the special counsel, Jack Smith, involving top secret information, the Mar-a-Lago kerfuffle, Mr. President Trump's involvement, if any, with encouraging and organizing the alleged attack on the Capitol. So this possible indictment, compared to the other two investigations, in my view, pales in comparison.
When it comes to this case, though, the Stormy Daniels hush money payment case, you've written about what you called a key piece of evidence. You said that Michael Cohen's tape is trouble for Trump. Michael Cohen, his former fixer, former attorney, who is the key witness in this case. You say that these recordings that prosecutors have could potentially be explosive. Explain why.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, Ghida, how many times I've had a trial and I played tapes. And even if the defendant's reading a phone book, just hearing the defendant's words on a tape has a profound effect. But this tape is different. This is a tape that Michael Cohen has presented to the prosecutors of a conversation Michael Cohen had with President Trump, who was a candidate, in September of 2016. And on that tape, there is reference to a payment of $150,000 in cash or check to catch and kill a story by Karen McDougal that she had an alleged affair with President Trump. Now, Karen McDougal was a former Playboy centerfold model, and the allegation is that she was given $150,000 through a third party to keep her story quiet.
Could the tape corroborate allegations that Trump tried to conceal the hush money payment, which is really the crux of the issue?
It's even better. It's even better. I got it with utmost respect. He mentions uses the word 150. Well, the amount of money paid to her through an intermediary was $150,000. He does say cash or check, and Michael Cohen on the tape says this is that David Pecker matter and that stuff. Well, David Pecker was basically with National Enquirer, and National Enquirer bought this story and killed it. So that tape, to me, is very inculpatory. It points towards guilt, and that gets into the state of mind of not only Michael Cohen, but also of Donald Trump. And that tape was September of 2016.
Another key issue here, and perhaps one of the most important questions, is can Trump ultimately be barred from running for office? What you need is a conviction, not just an indictment. And even if he were convicted, can he be barred from running for office? We know that these prosecutions can take years, and there isn't a clear precedent.
Well, here's the thing. I think the Constitution is silent on whether a person who has a felony conviction can run for president. It's silent on that. And I don't think there's any prohibition that I'm aware of. There could be a constitutional scholar that disagrees with me. If he's going to run for president while an indictment is pending, that clearly would not prevent him from being reelected, because an indictment is just a charging document and it's not a piece of evidence, and every individual is presumed innocent. So then you get to, if he's reelected, would the criminal trial go forward while he's president, or would it be stayed and stopped until he leaves office? That's another issue.
Would you bet on an indictment here, potentially even a conviction, and what does it hinge on?
Right. I would bet on an indictment. I think, as I said before, it's highly likely he'll be indicted by the prosecutor in Manhattan. The key part of this trial, in my opinion, would be the credibility of Michael Cohen, who obviously has baggage. He's a convicted felon. But if the jury believes Michael Cohen, if they believe that the records corroborate, support, and buttress what he's saying, then Donald Trump will be found guilty of the charges.
And how does it impact the election?
I think it could have a significant effect on the election if the trial is conducted during the election. If the trial's pushed back till after the election, I think among Donald Trump's core supporters, it will have little, if any, effect on their enthusiasm for Donald Trump. His supporters will think it's another witch hunt.
Gene Rossi, great to get your insights. Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
President Trump was wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. And his words that day were reckless. And they endangered my family and others at the Capitol. The American people deserve to know the truth of that day. They have every right to hold the president and others around him accountable.
How will all these ongoing attempts to hold the former president accountable affect the 2024 presidential election? While a growing number of Americans have an unfavorable opinion of Donald Trump, recent polls show the former president continues to have a significant lead among Republican voters over his closest presumptive rivals, with 55% support compared to 25% for DeSantis and 8% for Mike Pence. Joining me now to discuss the political ramifications of a potential indictment and its possible impact on the Republican nomination process is Barry Bennett, Republican strategist and advisor for Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Barry Bennett, Trump is facing potential indictment for hush money payments, but he's been under investigation for a while now, potentially for more serious alleged offenses. Will any of this stick?
You know, it's unknown. 20 years ago, if you told me that, you paid hush money to a woman, I would say that's a disqualifier, but that was 20 years ago. Times have changed. Also, there's a possibility that he turns this into playing a victim card himself, that so many people are after him with so many different charges that he can claim the victim card.
And he has in the past, and it's worked for him. And again, he's saying this is all a witch hunt.
Yeah.
Will it work again? It
could. I mean, after, they did this Russia stuff, which was ridiculous, and they've done, the Ukraine, he's been impeached twice by, partisan activities. So they really kind of allowed him, gave him the mantle of the victim card. So he'll use it, I'm certain. Will
any of this, the ongoing investigations, a possible indictment, will any of it sway his Republican base?
Absolutely. It will. It will hurt him for sure. Then the question is, can he get to 50% of the delegate? We elect our nominee at the party convention. You need 50% of those delegates. Can he get to 50%? That's the real question. We know he can get to 40, 42% right now. This might decay that down to 36, something like that. But he's got to get to 50.
You say it'll hurt him for sure, but will it? I mean, do we know for a fact that it will? Because certainly the Trump brand might have been affected and diminished among some Republican voters. But for his hardcore base, which makes up about 30 or 40% of the Republican Party, the more he plays the victimhood card, the more he is able to tell his followers that this is a fight between us and the deep state, the more he's able to galvanize them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's ever going to lose that 30, 35% of the Republican Party supporters who think that he's wonderful. But that's only 35%. And the other 65%, they now have another reason not to like him.
But is this still very much Trump's Republican Party?
Yeah, I mean, Trump has the ability to win the nomination. The question is, will he do the smart things that require him to get there?
What would these smart things be?
Admit that, all the mean tweets were probably not so great.
But that's what works with his base, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they love, but that's what the other part of the party does not love. So he's got to figure out how to mend the two back together. I'm not confident that he'll do that.
He's still well ahead of his closest presumptive rival.
Yeah.
The Florida governor, DeSantis. Yeah. What is his strategy? Because he's been taking him on, even though DeSantis hasn't yet, announced, officially at least, his candidacy.
The worst thing a politician can do is reinforce your negatives. I'm not sure that's really going to work for him. He's got an entirely different place in the primary. He should be out talking about the future, talking about policy and those kind of things, instead of calling people names.
You were an advisor to his presidential campaign in 2016.
Yeah.
Now, this possible indictment is in connection with alleged hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
And it hinges on the testimony of a key witness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Michael Cohen,
his
lawyer. Former attorney.
Yeah.
How credible will his testimony be?
Well, I mean, Michael Cohen's already been to jail for lying, so he's not terribly credible. He was his attorney, so he's abandoned all kinds of attorney-client responsibility. All this helps Trump. The underlying thing is this woman, he paid her a bunch of money for something. And that's not going to go away. I don't think it's a crime. I don't think it's a campaign violation. He used his personal money, not campaign money.
But he covered up what the payment was for.
Yeah, but I mean, so if a candidate pays their babysitter and it's not on the FEC report, does that mean that they're covering up that they're not watching their children?
The payment was mislabeled, wasn't it? As
it was sent to his attorney.
That's a potential violation.
It was sent to his attorney and his attorney paid it. Will
he be charged?
I think so. I mean, I think the partisanship of the DA in Manhattan, they definitely want to charge him. I'm not sure that they're going to get the result that they want. I think they might be making him a victim out of all of this instead of hurting him.
What is his current strategy? What is the key message that he's giving voters today?
The only reason he's given so far that he wants to run isn't continuing his policies or, do the things that were left undone. He says that it's about retribution, which is, I think, a horrible mistake.
He told voters he'll be their voice, their justice, their
There's
retribution.
going to be their retribution. He wants to get even. That is not a winning message in my estimation. I think that people want to vote for the future. They want to vote for their children. They want to vote for a better country, a better world, not to get even.
He wants to get even with whom?
The Democrats. They impeached him twice. They've got these partisan prosecutors in Georgia and Manhattan that are going after him. The Justice Department is going after him. So he thinks that he needs to get even with them. And that's his reason for running, which I think that's not a very good reason.
We hear that top Republicans are moving away from him. Mm-hmm. Is that true, and how significant is that shift?
Yeah, I mean, the big money guys are moving away from him for sure. I'm not sure how much that matters in most of these campaigns are funded by $25 donations, not $25 million donations. So I'm not sure that matters. But if you go back to 2016, when I was involved, Jeb Bush was going to be our nominee. Everybody said it. And he got nowhere. He went nowhere. And 9 months later, we were down to Carson and Trump, and then it was Trump. So I don't know that we can really know what's going to happen in the fall.
But do any of the other presumptive nominees for the Republican Party appeal to voters? Because we see that DeSantis is close enough to Trump, although Trump is still in the lead. Yeah. Nikki Haley is trailing by quite a distance. So is former Vice President Mike Pence.
Yeah. Yeah, and when Trump announced, he was way down the list as well. I think we go through this process where voters have to decide what they want. And then the candidates measure up to their needs. And we're not quite there yet. Over the summer, voters will decide what they're looking for, what we want. I mean, do we want Trump will be 78, Biden will be 82 or something. Or do we want to turn the page and go in a fresh direction? And my money says we probably will go in a fresh direction.
So if you were to bet on an outcome, what would it be?
I think that Trump does not get 50% of the delegates for the convention, would be my bet.
So getting the nomination is not guaranteed?
Not guaranteed at all. I think he's got to grow as a candidate. He's got to figure out what people really want and be the answer to those questions, or he won't be the nominee.
And if he's indicted?
It won't help him, that's for sure, but it could make him a victim, which might help him.
And if he is indicted, because a lot of people are talking now about the possibility of an indictment coming as early as this month. Yeah. What happens then?
Well, conviction could be very difficult. This is a area of the law that isn't very flushed out. And if he gets this case thrown out or is not convicted, then he'll have a full victim card to throw at the Democrats. So this could backfire on them.
All right. Barry Bennett, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Even before news of a possible indictment broke, Donald Trump, who faces state and federal criminal investigations, took the lead, preemptive self-defense, on March 6th at CPAC, the influential conservative political committee. Trump told reporters he will continue his presidential bid, even if he is indicted. Now, constitutionally, a convicted criminal, let alone an indictee, can seek the highest office, even from prison. Convicted of sedition back in 1918 for speeches denouncing the United States' participation in World War I, the socialist Eugene Debs ran for president in 1920 from prison in Georgia. Convict number 9653 won 3.5% of the vote. Only the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution sets an exception for persons, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion, or having, quote, given aid or comfort to the enemies of constitutional order. But this clause has never been tested for a presidential contender. On the other hand, federal statutes provide jail time for the illegal possession of top-secret documents. And a disqualification from holding any office in the United States after the FBI seized top-secret government documents at Trump's Mar-a-Lago property in Florida last year, many thought Trump was politically finished. He shows he is not. And so, in short, Trump may have not one, but several swords of Damocles hanging over him, but legally none blunt enough to clip his political wings. If convicted before the 2024 election in connection with hush money paid to silence an alleged mistress, that is unlikely to stop him, nor would a federal conviction for possession of secret files, as the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause would trump, with a small t, federal law. So the argument goes. What remains is a possible conviction for insurrection or rebellion for the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. Trump will use it politically, knowing full well that any conviction would not be handed down before the next president is sworn in. That's it from me, Ghida, Fakhry, and the team in Washington. Thanks for watching.